time, Dr. Asad, the most inclusive and most generous platform of Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, where we usually invite the scholars from all around the world to share their ideas, books, and anything. This is also the continuity of this exercise. And please uh, enlighten us about this book, how you perceive this idea. But before moving towards the detail about the book, for the listeners, I want to tell you about that Dr. Asadur Rahman is also a PIDE's alumni and currently teaching as assistant professor in social development and policy. So first of all, Dr. Asad, congratulations on your first book on politics of social special transformation in Pakistan, leaders and constituents in Punjab. So please enlighten uh, why you choose this topic and what is the importance of this book for Pakistan.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal and PIDE for giving me this opportunity to talk about my first book. Actually, this book basically, and I'm very happy that I'm starting my book launch from PIDE itself, because this book was conceived at PIDE initially when I was a graduate student there in 2014-15. So for my master's dissertation, I had to work. So there was this idea that at that time, it was post 2008, the 18th Amendment has already happened, or what we can say that democratic aspirations were very much high in the air. The democracy was restored. And there was a lot of talk about elections. And the first time in 2000, after 2013, or in 2013, first time an elected government was completing its 5 years full tenure. And so it was also the time when discussions around and scholarship moved towards studying political consolidations, democratization in Pakistan, and similar themes. So at that time, in PIDE, I started thinking about doing a political sociology and political development kind of study. And it started from there. And then it went on to become, I pursued further this topic into my, doctoral studies in France. And this is the result of the book, and which we are going to discuss, the contents of the book and a bit of discussion around what it really entails. So starting from there, I would like to put it this talk as seeing politics as engagement. And this was basically the idea of this politics, of this book, that how we can see, how we can understand, politics in the case of societies like Pakistan, which are still not very consolidated democracies, but rather where political participation is in its initial phase, or maybe because of certain authoritarian tendencies in the state structure itself. The political democratization project is still in its offing, or still is infantile. So mostly what we, how we study democratization, or how we study mainly the politics in Pakistan, the useful ways of studying, or the usual ways of studying politics, are what we usually call the top-down approach. And in that top-down approach, usually what lens we are available to us, like the institutional lens, what is the role of parliament, how the parliament works, how the political parties work, as far as we can take them as institutions. So whether there is a democracy in the political parties, how the bills are passed, how the bills are enacted, these kind of discussions. What is the ratio of power between the different houses of parliament, like National Assembly and Senate, who holds power, etc. So these are the institutional lens, and we do know that we have a lot of rich literature which tells us about the different ways the institutions of political institutions or even the non-political institutions do work and influence the politics in Pakistan. Second way is mostly the constitutional way, which is also the legal way. So we have very brilliant legal minds in Pakistan because a lot of political, founders of the Pakistan itself, they came from the legal background, and we see a lot of politicians, even mainstream, a large number of politicians are themselves, lawyers. Even Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and regime, which somehow passed this constitution of the 1973, was also, a lot of role was played by the lawyers in that regime. So we see that whether the Pakistani constitution, is somewhat pro-democracy, is it hybrid, what kind of, ideological foundations we have in the constitution, whether these ideological confrontations go on. We have, a kind of Islamic component into it, and then we have the liberal democratic component into it. So these kind of constitutional studies are also available. And lastly, there is the political economy kind of lens to study politics, in which how the larger political interest groups or economic interest groups somehow influence policy and politics. And so, as far as my training is concerned, in the French way, we see politics and policy as, interconnected subjects rather than, a kind of airtight, separate entities. So these are the usual lens which were available, but my initial graduate studies, which I chose, worked on how local elections, how the local electoral politics work, and how voters basically vote. What is the behavior of voters? That was the cornerstone of my graduate studies. But during that, I also, find limitations into this behavioralist studies or this behavioralist lens, that we cannot just, quantify uh, some kind of behaviors of people which are very much, unique events in 5 years or so, because usually people come to vote only in 5 years. So also, so I thought, I realized in that time that there are other, factors, other variables are involved in this whole discussion, or in which, or in this whole, behaviors which people show at the electoral booths or the electoral days. So what was those characteristics? So number one is the what we my attention goes to the transformations or the social rural transformations. So social transformation, even in the economic domain, we study Karl Polanyi and others' work, in which we look at the great transformations, that how, for example, the transformation in the social structures influence the economic outcomes or economic behaviors of the involved actors. So similarly, we have in this Pakistan this, because although we see usually the top-down approach, see that how a particular set of policies influence a particular place or space, uh, but we see that in Pakistan, the most of the time, these transformations are unplanned. We can see them in the land use. We can see them in the the nature of job markets in in rural areas. More and more, they are not planned in that particular way, but the penetration of markets into the rural hinterlands, and also what we can say, the population increase, somehow are more prominent forces that change and shape all these three factors, and especially the structure of desire and feelings. And in the rural areas, we now see more and more people uh, somehow expecting, inspiring, and also a kind of public services or other kind of services which are pretty much not neatly set in with this idea of rural we have in our minds, and especially in the case of Pakistan, where the rural and urban somehow, at least at the level of policy and governance, are seen as airtight entities. So the rural has some specific characteristics, and the people of rural have some specific characteristics, and similarly, the urban, so they are contrasted with the urban. But what we see in on the ground was that even we see that the land in rural areas is not just for agriculture, but we see a lot of real estate penetration into the rural areas. Similarly, we see that most of the people are not engaged in agriculture, and they are moving towards other self-employment kind of jobs. And also the structure of desire, the feeling they want their kids to be educated, they want services, they want other kind of personal utilities, which are very much linked with the ideas of being urban. So that is why I call it the urbanization process, which has been happening in the rural Punjab. So therefore, there I choosing the field. So similarly, the field for my master's and for my PhD was the same. It was the Sialkot. And why it was Sialkot? So I'll explain briefly in here that first of all, the Sialkot is an old settled district. So in Punjab, we have two kind of districts. The larger part of Punjab is, especially that central Punjab is those villages or those districts which are part of the canal colonies, and which were established not more than 150 years ago during the British period. And so they have a very fine, refined kind of a grid, hydraulic, political and governance infrastructure. They are laid into grids, and they are very pretty much planned in the sense. And the people, most of the residents of those districts are somehow came outside from those districts. So their politics is pretty much, and then the land tenure system there is also different, because the land was available. So usually the patidari or the zimidari land tenures are available there. But we see in the Sialkot, there is a small land ownership. So there is a cliche in the Pakistani politics that the Zimidari elite or the Zimidars or the feudal, usually it's a wrong, I would say, a term to use, but social category. But still, I would like to call them the Zimidar elites or the feudal elites. They are the dominating the politics in Pakistan. They are dominating the parliament. They are not letting it happen. The different kind of policy engagements or different kind of policy proposals are blocked at the parliament because of the domination of the rural elite. And people are, and the voters do not have agency, because they do not have recourse to any other form of judicial and other system which can help them, or any kind of recriminations from the Zimidar elites. So that is why the voters don't have agency. And so Zimidars are dominating. But Sialkot, historically, and I'll show you also in the 2010 agriculture census, that the Sialkot is, or has only 6% of landlord or rich peasants, which are above 50. Most of the people, or most of the farmers you will find there, are somewhat between 5 to 25 acres of lands, and these are a kind of a contrast, provides a contrasting picture. Similarly, the industrial cluster of Sialkot, we all are very much familiar at PIDE, and even beyond that, how much Sialkot has gained, fame because of its being an industrial cluster, an export-based cluster. And because of that, the effect is that, which we will also find in the second table here, the type of employment which I took from the PSLM, and that you will find that the non-agricultural employment is the highest one. So the employees, either you will find them, there are employers or self-employed or paid employees or unpaid family workers. And owner, cultivator or sharecropper are almost just 10% of them. And there is also an interesting non-traditional agriculture. Your contract cultivator, is also emerging, which is may have a future for the agricultural policy also. So uh, in that sense, because most of the people have to go to the urban centers to work, so there is a rural commute. Rural urban commute is necessary. Because of that, you need infrastructure. And because of that, because infrastructure delivery in rural areas, we do not have any separate rural development center or a policy framework. So most of the rural development goes through the M&A MPA funds. So because of that, it becomes a political good also. So commute, but at the same time, how commute affects the person who is commuting. So people commute for example, education. People commute for jobs. People commute for buying, utilities and etc. So, but they also open to the social exposure. They can contrast their village lives, their village society and provisions there with the more urban centers, which are better off in that sense. Similarly, the social exposure, now we can also see that the social media is also another source of social exposure which influence them. Secondly, there is a low poverty and also the evidence of collective action. We do know that the how Salkoti bourgeoisie was able to develop not only its own airport, its port, dry port, and now its own airline. But there are other also matching grant systems which we find in Sialkot, where the Chamber of Commerce match the percentage of grant with the provincial government in order to provide for infrastructure at the urban level, or which connects basically the rural this with the rural also, but also with the larger motorway systems. And recently we also know that the Sialkotis were also able to have connect themselves with Lahore through the motorway in 2020 during this study. So this was the Sialkot and the research strategy. So basically, I was already familiar with the scope, but then again, I developed a more grounded research strategy. I chose Union Council Badoki, which was consisting of 10 villages. So then I divided my attentions or my strategy into two parts: the participant observation and the interviews with the local political influencer, leaders, intermediaries, etc. So the participants' observation also led to informal encounters, and interviews helped me to dig more into the values and ideas, the moral universes of those actors who are doing so, who are basically leading the political engagements in that particular, union council. But it was mostly my fieldwork was limited to Badoko Union Council, but interviews were spread across the districts, Sialkot, and especially its two tehsils, Samdayal and Daska. Then, so it leads to me, it helps me to categorize, identify forms of political interactions which happens between different kind of political leaders, whether MN and MPAs, local leaders of the UC level, then there are even the village level leaders, and that led me to develop an idea of the gradients of political engagements, which I will be explaining below. So, um, the grid. So what are those interactions? So yes, usually we study only the interactions during the between as voters and as the candidates. But what we, so that is also the subtitle of the leaders and the constituents. So rather than focusing, so I take that lens of constituency, because a leader, if you want to win, whether you want to get elected, whether you are elected or not, we see the political leaders of any caliber do work in remain available to all of their constituents in the local field between the elections also for the 5 years. So the idea was that who are the political actors, either the leaders, supporters, voter, what they bring on table, what are the demands basically which the political actors or the political leaders had to meet. Secondly, what are the moral idioms or ideals, in which they work, in which they are embedded? For example, there are always expectations. A politician, a leader, and a constituent, for example, in an urban constituency in Pakistan, and even if we can compare it in any other more Western democracies, they do not share similar kind of moral universes. In the here, the demands of the constituents are different. So the leaders have to accept it. And secondly, what kind of local political system or state infrastructure that constituents had to engage and negotiate with. They have to go to very small scale things like registering your NIC card, changing your getting a connection for your electricity or any other kind of public utilities, or even getting your kid admitted into a public school, or getting a doctor receiving you well in the hospitals. So these kind of so these are the state institutions which on everyday level the constituents or the local residents have to meet. And if you are not that much influential that you can buy and go to the private sector, so then you need a kind of access to that, and that access is managed through this way. So the embeddedness, so the people are embedded there, and then the political ecology, the space they are living, the kind of settlement they are living, the scale and size of the village they are living. So the place does matter, what kind of place you are living in. So these things somehow helped me to develop this resulting frame, which is that there are four gradients. So gradients is basically usually more science, ecological concept, which we use the gradients of temperature, that there is a kind of a slope. So I use it and borrow it from there in order to explain that the purpose and the nature, the kind of purpose they are engaging, and the actors involved in those engagements kind of develop a political gradients or a political gradient. So I divided the politics of these localities into four gradients. The one is the electoral politics. The purpose is to safeguard reputation or winning elections, because most of the time electoral politics is not just about winning, it's also about reputation at the local level, especially in the local government elections here. Even similarly, we see that we usually only look at winners or losers or the second or third number of candidates, but there are always 10, 12 candidates in a particular seat, for a particular seat. Who are they? Why they get in there? Why they want to get in there? So there is a reputation thing came in. Then there is a solving problems, which we discussed. These are little problems, whether you want to get a gas connection, whether there's a high bill. Most of the people, maybe you do not know how to deal with such kind of actions, so they go to a local, very local leader, like your village level chairman and or village level counselors. Then the development transmissions, and as we discussed, the CDF is a very pertinent category. CDF is the Constituency Development Fund. So the Constituency Development Fund in most of the countries, developing countries, where we see the political democracies of the Westminster type, like we are here in Pakistan, they use these kind of instruments of the Constituency Development Fund, where here we call it the MPMN grants. So securing development funds, because there is no other way that your roads are going to be built, your streets are going to be laid down, or your sanitation infrastructure would be rehauled or something. No. So development transformation is another important, in which a lot of engagement behind the scene goes on. Similarly, the collective action. So collective action, this is an interesting and new type, because I talked about the collective action at the bourgeoisie level, but there is also the collective action which happens at the political collectives at the village level. So we see that there are some small collectives, coalitions of local residents who were writing petitions because there was a that brick kiln or bhatta was being built, which was violating the EPA or Environmental Protection Agency's orders also. So there was some kind of a collective action was also involved there. So now just briefly, in order to show what is the electoral gradient. So we see the electoral gradient. So yes, the institutional factors does matter. The party is very important in here, and especially in the case of these regions, parties are becoming important. We do know now that parties carry their votes now, which are not just the electables votes, but are the parties' vote. But at the same time, because these parties do not have electoral organizations only work or function well because on the day of elections or on the last months of elections, you see we need a lot of organization to achieve objectives. So because they don't have the party organization, so MNA and MPs themselves, whoever the candidate will get, MP, MNA election, they had to manage the organization of electoral campaigns, electoral jalsas, and even the last day of electoral polling. And now, given we do know that they have to sit in front of the RO's office to get results, because otherwise sometimes results get changed. So all these activities are again come on to the MNA MP candidates. So these MNA MP candidates have, then how they build their electoral machines based on the local UC level chairman and candidates, where they have, their relationships. And those local candidates somehow then have the households. They directly go there. They use assistance and persuasion. The relations of trust and familiarity becomes very much important in all those electoral campaigns. And this is not just very simple that someone get elected easily. So these all things somehow goes down there. Similarly, this is the problem solving. We do know that how, for example, we have this idea that everybody who is doing these kind of tasks take money. So there is, always they're all touts. So, but yes, by looking deeply into that moral world or moral universe of these actors, we see that there is two type of such actors. That one are those who are political. They don't take money. They rather spend money. They have to use it as a kind of a resource for their own future electoral campaigns, or for their building self reputation. And there is the transactional professional brokers, which we are found always anyways now. They are on the rise, but still the political brokers are there who help these local people to get in there. Then the connection between performance and politics, we all go walk beside these kind of boards which are available every nook and corner. And mostly we see them as we in a negative manner. And it irks us yeah, that these are look that why they have put their names in there. But this performativity and politics is pretty much linked with each other. It is not just that the Khadme Ala's name is there, but all down to the Zere Nigrani and Khususi Kavishan, etc. So these are all those electoral machines which we discussed before, who are basically working in here, and then again require a kind of recommendation, a kind of reputation. It increases their reputation, which is very much an important aspect for them. And lastly, the collective action. And we have discussed about the two kind of collective actions, the Bhatta collective and the Chapar collective. One of the biggest problem in these areas is that there is no sanitation infrastructure. And the old sanitation system, which revolved around pond or Chapar, is somehow taken over by the increasing population. So people somehow take in their all that land, and whenever there is rain, so the whole village face a lot of issues. So in the Bhatta collective, we see that there is two villages were involved. In Chapad collective, one village was involved. And a lot of there are initiators, donors, signatories, license brokers. So there is a lot of internal what we call a division of labor involved in there. And so these kind of activities they all perform. So at the end, I would just like to say that these all electoral gradients, which are we can see that these gradients somehow connect policy, politics, state infrastructures, and also the local moral universes of both the leaders and the constituents. So I'll stop here, and thanks for listening. And now let's move to the uh, question answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Asad, for a very brief discussion. But I have a question. We want to learn a little more about how this social special transformation has occurred and what we have learned from this transformation. Second, how we can say that it is the absence of Zamindara system, or this when use the figures of agricultural census as that overall 6% are holding land more than 50 acres. Uh, we know this when we see the figures, the census you quoted is 89% farmers hold land less than 12.5 acres. But the remaining 10% or 11% that farmers, they are less in numbers, but they hold a large volume of land. One thing. Second, how you can differentiate the uh, differences in uh, uh, South Punjab and Upper Punjab, because the area chosen is very different and a developed area. So their rural areas are also developed. So many areas in Upper Punjab are also developed, and we can say that there is development we can see.
Mhm.
But in South Punjab, the circumstances are totally different. So please enlighten us on these questions.
Okay, thank you. I
And
mean,
this is
first I would like to make a correction. 6% is the total land they own in Sialkot. It's a district
mm,
level.
mhm,
It's not that the 6% totally they are.
mm,
6%
mm,
land they own in there.
mm,
While when I was making, for example, comparisons with Gujarat and other kind of, Gujarat is a right next, it was higher, and other districts like DG Khan and Multan, and they were the percentage of land owned by the large farmers is very high. And that give them clout because most of the land in the agriculture in the villages, so they have that control on those villages where they have the larger land tracts. So on in the so there it is at the Sialkot, kind of contrasted with that because no large land mostly is available, and especially if some large landowners even are there, they are not into those tehsils which I was studying. And even if we look at, for example, the MN and MPs coming out from there, you will find not a single large landowner, working in. So my point was that also in a way, it also tells in a negative manner that even our bourgeoisie or those non-feudal land, politicians may have shared the similar characteristics which we are find more appalling and somehow only available in the landed elites. So it's not just maybe so that is the point. Secondly, I think uh, South Punjab, for example, I'm from South Punjab. I mean, I belong to Sadikabad. It is the last part of South Punjab, and so whenever I was doing these kind of studies in Sialkot, I was also trying to make a comparison in there also. But I think, I mean, this urbanization, and this is what I think is kind of give it a meat to this concept, that it is not just limited here. When we see, for example, the villages, even because what are the driving forces, for example, which are shaping the rural social and political space? Connectivity, which are on the one hand physical, for example, roads. I don't see any beside Cholistan and those areas. I don't see most of the villages are not physically connected with. Secondly, motorcycle. I mean, motorcycle, and it's coming of age, and especially since it has been started becoming indigenously in Pakistan, and the prices become low, the connectivity and the commutation becomes pretty much open even in everywhere. There is a very wonderful by the Lok Sojak, Tahir Mehdi Sahib had done a very wonderful on Okada, not on a Kada Chicha Vatni, a very wonderful documentary which is available on YouTube, and you will find the similar kind of things, even in there. So I think, and the more like the Upper Punjab, or what we call the Potohar region, again, it has been historically, remained more in the what we call jobs, government jobs in there. So it has always a very different kind of uh, I would say trajectory of development, because of the presence of large number of cantonments there, which somehow change the local economy and society in a much manner. So Sialkot, in that sense, give me, because even though Sialkot is not that much agrarian still, but there it falls into the agrarian zone where 3 crop patterns a year is there, because it is a very fertile land. And so, what was your first question? I'm not sure about that, but I think that this thing is happening across the Pakistan, even in Sindh.
Okay. So how you see this change? How do you see this transformation, and how is it the
Yeah.
pace is lower in South Punjab than Upper Punjab, and what are the benefits that we can expect from this transformation? Uh, uh, please continue.
I mean, number one, the benefit you can see now, for example, the kind of authoritarian control, usually the Pakistani, state had on political manipulation. At least you will don't find that kind of thing now. I mean, because the fieldwork was done in 20, just before the COVID, and then, but we see that electables lost in 2023 by elections a lot in across. So there is a more agency which is coming down. Political parties are making much more inroad. The political, I would say, is there. So that is one thing, that party vote bank. The other things I think is, which I'm sure, I mean, what are the reasons and the causes? Number one, there is a concept we use it's the in situ, what we can say, the population density or in situ urbanization. So there is a lot of discussion on migration from rural to urban, and we find a lot of policy literature on also, and we see that urbanization is becoming very important. But in that respect, what I think the missing link was that, because even the people are leaving rural areas, but still the population of rural areas is increasing, and the needs and demands, of public service delivery and other kind of economic, social, are also changing, because the population, density is increasing, and that is basically driving it, the local political, ecology of the rural area.
So we'll move towards chat, but very shortly, how you see the absence of basic democracies in overall this transformation, and we also like the question from Shahid. Please answer your question.
Ji, Asif Saab, thank you very much. Very nice lecture. Normally, this kind of analysis does escape the mainstream, especially of the rural areas. So it was very enlightening lecture. I do have a question. Uh, this consolidation that you talked about, and this especially, and you very interestingly mentioned the density, per capita density of population increasing in rural areas. Now, what does that, you may have talked about it, and I might have, sorry, missed it, but what does this consolidation and what does this density increase imply for the politicians that have been holding power in those areas, or for the influentials that have been holding power? Have they consolidated their power more, or are there any new forces that are going to break up that hold, that Patwari, Thanedar, Zamidar type of hold that we normally talk about? So, and what's the implication of economic implication of density increasing, per capita density of people increasing in an area? Thank you.
Okay, so I was saying that the consolidation, the democratic consolidation, are different ways. So for me, I think the most important thing is the nature of relationship between leader and constituent. That is important. I did not mention in here, it's a very dense, chapter. But what happened is that there are 3 A's. You have to be always available to the constituent. You have to be, respectful, and you have to give respect to any kind of, constituent that is coming to your way. And most of the time these this could be a good proxy as to understand the consolidation, because what is democratization itself if you are not making your leaders accountable for that? So whatever you are whether it is from A party or B party or C party, they have to work hard to garner votes. They cannot sit in their homes and order it. What is, and this is not just the clientelism. Clientelism is basically, for me, clientelism is some kind of, I would say, it's not a it's a morally repugnant kind of term for me, clientelism. When there is no other institutional mechanism there, the people have to do their things. They have to meet a certain basic demands. So what they do is they develop these kind of local, very embedded, grounded kind of ways and mechanisms through which they do their things. So in that sense, I think we can see it as a way of democratic consolidation. Uh, Secondly, the new forces. I mean, yeah, because the way we look at, our frames from top down, we always trying to fit in a certain ideals onto a situation, and then would like to see that whether that situation fits into that ideal or not. If it is not fitting into that ideal, then it has not changed. But change is a permanent, thing of or a permanent feature of a social life. So but I think that we will not find new forces in that particular kind, but there is more local leaders. So the number of contestants for one electoral seat are increasing. That is one way to look at the new forces. I have documented in the book that there are also, for example, candidates from the lower caste groups or lower status groups, because they are now part of what we can call, quote unquote, the middle class milieu. So there is that they are also contesting for the political offices or elected offices, and they do not belong to the traditional social hierarchy or the higher status groups. And secondly, and the lastly, what you were saying about density and economic, uh, I mean, I'm not sure, this was not particularly my lens to look at, because I was more working on the political and sociology side of things. But I think that density is now forcing people to, for example, they are a negative and other things also. For example, the migration outside, we do have seen that donkey kind of things. This is happening because of that force, because the land parcelization process is happening for a long time, so that land plots have become smaller there, and now they are looking for what there. Secondly, I think I discussed a bit in there that because the land parcels are so small, and on the other hand, there is that kind of affective attachment with the land that the people don't sell it. And also because it is problematic, because if there is 1 acre and there are 4 or 5 inheritors or those who are owners of it, so they cannot sell it. And also the factive attachment. So what is happening is that there is a new kind of contractor appears, and one of that contractor, I mean, some of them are also belong to the non agrarian groups who are not landowners in traditional sense, but because they have the kind of skill now, so there are contractors who are like taking contract from very different landowners around 200 acres in these areas, and growing for example, potato and maize and these kind of crops. So this is also another economic activity. Thirdly, I think because of also the urban density in Sialkot is also very much increasing, and because we are not moving towards the vertical construction, so they are expanding on the horizontally. So in that sense, a lot of workshops and other kind of industrial infrastructure, you can also find that also coming into the Sialkot rural areas, which also are kind of an economic aspect of it. So I hope I have answered your question.
So one thing more on political economy. During your discussion, you skip the detail of political economy, how this political economy is affecting this transformation. I think it has more control and more power now.
No, I mean there are two types of powers. I mean, yes, but if I'll put it like the hegemony is not there. The power is there, the naked power. So, but when power become naked, it is not very stable power in ways. So secondly, I'm not able to answer your question particularly, but because I'm coming from the top bottom up approach in this, especially in this sense, because for me this was part of my graduate thesis, that it is a middle class area. So the middle class milieu, what we can call, that small universe in which you live, it's middle class aspirations, middle class lifestyles, so so you find a healthy middle class in Sialkot region. And what democratization theory traditionally tells us is that the changes in economy moving away from agrarian to more urban sector and commercial economies and urban middle class lifestyles leads towards democratization, leads towards heavy participation, increased participation. But they think it as the institutional. Now this is the problem with modernization theories. Big for me, I'm not say that, because they are taking guide of the Western experience, because it has already happened there. So it was easier to conceptualize it, because they led to movements which changed the institutional structures or institutional demands. But because this is not happening, so it is very, I would say, infra political kind of very small things are happening together, and we do not make that whether it is affecting the large infrastructure or the what we can call the macro infrastructure there, not that directly, but yes, it is happening, and we can find signs of it, in which, I mean, for example, the rise of PTI somehow very destabilized these old political blocks there. Although PMLN was still able to win there, but the margins were very smaller. And also there was a lot of, what we can say, it does not reflect in just votes. And that is why I say that don't go just for votes to understand politics. Because the kind of discussions you hear on dharas, on deras, on other places, kind of give you always that there is something going on, which is somehow not pretty much neatly fit in with the old ways of politics.
So you are telling about how many changes that has occurred, but very critical about desires. How these desires has transformed. People want to become big, or they don't want to leave their land. They have some emotional affiliations still, although the parcel of lands are becoming smaller and there are less incentives in smaller parcels. And how you see the land complexity of land market associated with this, and desires in a broader spectrum. Please explain.
Okay, I'll I'll just explain it, but I'll just add one more thing, because I just want to also, for example, if you are, I mean, ideology, okay, fine. You have a political party's presence, fine. Your political parties, your leaders have a persona which attracts people, fine. But still you need political workers or political leaders at the constituency and union council level who have an idea of how to give service to people. If you don't have that, you are not going to win elections, and you will always be dependent on the big brothers to have things do for you. And this was basically another way to explain that the moral universe in which our voters and leaders are still exist is not the moral universe of the transactional and commercial relationships, which we find, or kind of a democratic participatory nature, moral universe. It's not still there, but still there are other ways to understand it, that people want these kind of services. They want मेरा ये काम हो, मेरे घर में ये हो, मेरा ये हो, and you have to be available for that. Even if you are not able to do it, there should be a kind of performance that you're doing it, and that is important. That is also part of democratization. That was so. Secondly, this because the rural urbanization, because usually we call it urban rural linkages. Economists easily explain in these terms. We can call it there could be many other lands, but this is urban rural linkages. But for me, why I use rural urban as a category in this whole book, because of this prevalence of desire. The people living in rural are not peasants, or do not have a kind of mentality, or the sense of their own self, which is pretty much linked to the peasants, like bradri, like the idea of self, their own self, what they want to do, how they look like, so individualism is there. We do not expect that the rural areas are, we expect still that there should be collectivities, identities are collective, whether you are A Bradri, B Bradri, or C Bradri, and we do not find, or we find it maybe somehow that it is an urban phenomenon, that the nuclear family and kind of individualism that exists, in which you can change your castes, whoever you are, but you turn to urban and you change it. But that Ashrafization process is happening in these areas too. For example, most of the low status group, that was another part of the study of the group, they now you have to go to them to ask for votes. You are not asking them कि जी इसको vote डाल दो. No, you have to go to their doors to ask for votes. And secondly, because of this individualization, the larger, there are three terms which we use. There is a bradri, there is a tabbar, and there is a khandan or family. So bradri is a larger, hundreds and hundreds of households could be part of a bradri. There is a tabbar, which is usually they call it, from your grandparents or their pardada to the present generation. That is a tabbar. And then there is a family, which is the idea of like your dada, the khandan, your dada, your father, and you. So now the things have moved to this level there, even in political terms. And in social and marital terms, I think we need to dig in more, and we will find more interesting things there.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll ask the participants if they have anyone have any question. Okay, जी अब्दुल्ला सर.
देखने को आ रहे हैं, मिसाल के तौर पर यूथ बल जो केवीके में हम नोट किए कि पॉलिटिकल डायनेमिक्स को चेंज किया जाता है, पर जो वोटर है वो यंग है, तो इनकी रिलेशनशिप किस तरह, स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ डिजायर किस तरह, वो किस तरह पॉलिटिकल लीडर्स उसको कैटर कर रहे.
Yeah, thank you, Abdullah. But exactly, it's not very different from the KP. But in the KP, I think the only difference is that even the older generations are pro-PTI. But here we find the middle classes are pretty much divided between the both political parties. And inordinately, I would say, we do not have statistics, and I don't want to go for whatever the hypes in media is created. We may have we only have one survey on that, and that is, I mean, the World Value Survey. I think it was 20, I don't know whether it is more recent has come or not, but it was happened in 2018, 2019, or 2019, 20, when Pakistan was included in the World Value Services. And there we do not find any kind of a youth inordinately supporting PTI. But I'm not sure, because there were villages where the youth was with PTI. There were villages where the youth was not with PTI. There was people with People's Party also, and PMLN also. And now, I mean, we need to create a distinction between voting preferences and support. Because sometimes vote is not, you're not voting the person you want to. And it is not because of the pressure or because of the caution, but it is also the affective attachment, your family with the candidate, with the areas. And if you will read the book, there is a lot of, such, even the person who was who was a kind of, he has to leave. He was friend with the PMLN member, and he wanted to vote PTI. But if he would have done that, his whole taluk would have gone. So he left, he did not vote, and he came back, after the voting is done, or rather next day. So it's a kind of, so this is not, I mean, I think this study was all about that whether is a youth bulge. Yes, there is a youth bulge. But I think, this kind of ideas keep on shifting very, very, very fast. In 5 years, you will change. Things becomes, this is we are living in a very, a kind of what we call it, a liquid modernity, a very hyper kind of a modernity. Things keep on changing. So we need a more grounded, more survey kind of a research, very much rigorous, in order to understand that whether it is the case or not.
Okay, anyone else who have a question? Oppo A16, you raised the hand just a few minutes ago. You have any question?
How democratization is improved because wheelchair people are less educated. It is a problem for this study.
I mean, basically, I do not buy or do not agree with this idea that education makes you more enlightened, or education makes you, because education, I would say that the correct kind of education may do that. So if on the one hand, if the education itself is, a kind of an ideological way, or pouring more ideological, narcissism in yourself. So I don't think in that particular sense. But yes, you can, if we look into, because that was in my graduate that I did a survey there. So education levels are not, I mean, that bad there. Women participation is very high. I mean, especially more and more women are teaching and in these professions. Also, ignorance and education are not mutually, I think they are not same. Because we can see people who are educated, but it still holds ideas which I mean, could be backward looking, or could be fascistic, or could be very populist, or could be very authoritarian. And we see people who are not educated, but they have that a kind of maturity to allow participation, to allow discussion. So I think this is problematic. This category of education influencing political behaviors may not have that much currency as we do put it on.
Why you only choose the rural areas to understand the socio-spatial transformation?
Yeah, because this is my
Why not urban? Because
Because
social or special transformation is also occurring in urban centers.
yes, because most of the people are working on urban areas. There is a hype of urban areas, metropolitan studies. Urbanization is a problem. Everybody is running after them. But still, I mean, majority is still in rural areas. And we are so much dependent on our food ecosystem on the rural areas, that we are not giving that much importance to it. And we only, so secondly, I think this is the reason. Secondly, I think because of my agriculture background, you know, so that was one reason which was pushing me towards that. And thirdly, I think ethnographies in urban areas are very difficult.
Mhm.
Really, I mean, there are very few ethnographies I would find, and and they are mostly on organizations or on political Islam, or things, or themes around that. Yes, there is on middle class, but urban areas require, and secondly, I think in urban areas, middle class is much more there. They do it. I mean, then you have to decide where in urban areas, because urban areas is not one urban areas, no?
Mhm.
So I mean, these were, but now, so lastly, you also want to bring in a research gap, so I'm trying to locate myself on the fringes of urban and rural
Oh,
to see on the both sides.
thank you so much for your time, for enlightening us about the socio-spatial transformation, especially in how it occurred in rural areas. And it's very thought-provoking and enlightening for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Faisal, and thank you, PIDE, and all those who are, take this decision to allow me to launch my book with PIDE, which is also my, alma mater, and where this whole process started, and it will keep on going. It is not still. I mean, I try to expand these theoretical lenses to across Pakistan. So I hope that it will always be, pleasure to come back to PIDE again and again. So thank you.
Oh, you are always welcome.